Hello everyone, a few weeks ago I answered the question how long does it take to learn a language, and this week I wanted to answer the question which language to choose. It's a very common question, and if you ask for my personal opinion, I think the most important thing is really your motivation. It doesn't really matter any of the things I will talk about if in the end you're not motivated, but I'm sure this is not what you're here for, so in this video I will give you 4 criteria which I hope will help you choosing a language to learn. The 4 criteria for this video will be first time, then resource, then usefulness, and finally difficulty. So let's start talking about the first concept, which is time. And by time what I mean is the time you will spend learning the language. A lot of people don't really know that, but to learn a language you need to spend actually quite a bit of time doing it. It's not something you can only do an hour or 2 hours a week, once a week. It's something you have to do actually quite regularly. It's hard to say how long it should be, but I think a good amount is about half an hour every day or maybe an hour every 2 days. And for some languages, the time you will need to reach an equal level will be different. For example, for an English speaker, most likely French or Spanish will take less time to reach a sort of conversational level, while in Japanese or Chinese it will take you more time because you have to learn the reading, the writing potentially. So these are things that will take you more time. So if you think your timetable will be limited, maybe a language that requires less commitment or that is more accessible in terms of just the alphabet, for example, might be a better option. So the second concept is resources. And resources is important to take into account because for some languages, there are more resources than for others. So if you want to learn French, Spanish, Italian, or whatever popular language, there will be many more resources. There will be lots of websites, lots of videos on YouTube, lots of movies as well, for example. But for other languages, the resources will be more scarce. I know, for example, for European Portuguese, and it's not even a rare language, there aren't that many resources because, to be fair, it's because maybe people tend to learn Brazilian Portuguese more. But I think that puts you in perspective how a European language can be sort of difficult to find resources for. So other languages that are less popular or less known might be more of a challenge for you. But as an alternative, you can also check on YouTube if there aren't YouTubers that do language lessons for that language, or if you have more money and your budget is a bit, let's say bigger, you can also consider private tuition online or in person if you can find it. That is more expensive, but that can be also a nice way to get around it, and you get to practice with a native speaker. Then we have the concept of usefulness, and I kind of hate that word because I don't think any language is more useful or more useless than any other languages, but we'll take the word usefulness as to mean the opportunities that this language can give you. And these opportunities will be different for different people. Is it that you want to be able to travel in a specific country or area with this language? Is it that you want to improve your career prospects? Is it that you want to be able to watch movies in that language that you want to learn? It really depends, and no reason is better than the other one. But for example, if in your industry French is quite useful, or you are likely to have to travel to France for work, then learning French might be the way to go. But if in your industry a language such as Portuguese, why not, is not as useful, then maybe it might not be the language you want to learn. Sometimes when people talk about usefulness of a language, they talk about the number of native speakers, and I don't really find this very useful nor relevant. Again, it really depends on what you want to do with this language, but for me, knowing English when I go to Japan is almost useless because, most people don't actually speak English, so it's more useful for me to learn Japanese. So if I plan on going to Japan regularly, then learning Japanese is much more useful to me than knowing English. I mean, I'm glad I know English, don't get me wrong. And the last criteria will be difficulty. I know a lot of people will say things like, oh, if you're a native speaker of English, then you should learn French or Spanish or German or whatever, because it's easier. But I want to put this into perspective. If you take a language such as French, and I would know because I teach it and I'm French, French is difficult because of the spelling, for example. It has also quite difficult pronunciation. There's also conjugation, which is very difficult because you have 6 different forms and like 8 or 9 tenses that you need to know to speak fluent French. Now, take as an example Japanese. Japanese is sort of notoriously known as being fairly difficult because it has 3 writing systems. It's very different sounding compared to English. It also has different word order. But when you think of it, aside from the writing, which is not even that hard, it does take practice, but it's not inaccessible, the grammar is also more regular, the conjugation is much easier, the spelling is much more regular because Japanese works by syllables as opposed to individual letters, and that can be considered as being quite easy. So I wouldn't really listen to people that say this language is harder, this language is easier. In fact, I would argue that in my case, learning Japanese is difficult, for sure, but I do find the difficulties of Japanese, even the intricacies of Japanese, to be very interesting. It just really creates or sparks something in me that makes me want to learn it even more. I mean, I like the complexity of the writing system. It's just super interesting. And I think you can turn these difficulties into something that actually makes you feel passionate about the language. It's all about your mindset, isn't it? So that's it for this video. I hope you found it informative and useful, and to give it some conclusion, I wanted to say that even though these 4 criteria are very important, for me the most important one is motivation. Because without motivation you can try and learn the easiest language in the world, I mean supposedly. If you don't have motivation, you will give up. I mean, there's no way you will be able to find the motivation to do it regularly, may it be every day or every 2 days, if you're not actually motivated. And really you have to follow your guts with this question, because it's very personal. One person will find a language more interesting than others, and it is really just based on the person. So do make a decision based on the criteria I mentioned in this video, but also follow your guts. So that's it. I will see you next week. Bye!